if I'm not the future of House Atreides?
A great man doesn't seek to lead. He's called to it. But if your answer is no, you'll still be the only thing I ever needed you to be. My son.
Dune was always going to be a big film. Not only is the original text and its expanded universe created by Frank Herbert one of the most seminal texts in modern sci-fi, but the series also has a huge legacy in cinema. After cult director Alexander Jodorowsky's psychedelic version of Dune went bust before it could be produced, cult director David Lynch gave it a shot, but ended up getting crushed by studio pressure, resulting in him removing his name from the final cut. Fortunately, Denis Villeneuve pulled out all the stops and realizing Dune on the scale it always deserved, imbuing the film with incredible design, strong castings, and the mysterious air that has become the director's signature.
Since day one, the whole project has been designed to be seen on an IMAX screen.
The scope on display is epic, and every frame is filled with impeccable detail and beauty. From the unique aircrafts, particularly the balloon-like spice harvester transports reminiscent of the alien vessels in Arrival, to the clean, incredibly detailed aesthetics in the costume and set design, reflecting the modern futurism of Blade Runner 2047, the design of Dune is recognizably Villeneuvian. With the muted palette of desert tans and stony greys of Arrakis, bold architectures, and clever use of light, the cinematography by the Mandalorian's Greig Fraser breathes life into Herbert's universe. But that doesn't mean the film is easy to understand. With the original hardcover at over 400 pages and the modern version at 900, alongside the multiple follow-up books, Dune's science fiction universe is as complex as they come. Hey guys, what's happening? Niyat here with Film Comics Explained. And today, we're going to be exploring Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of Frank Herbert's classic, and the lore from the novels to help give us a better footing on what to expect in the upcoming series of films.
Come with me.
Set in the year 10,191, the galaxy has been split up into a variety of factions, the strongest of which are the three houses Atreides, Harkonnen, and Carino, each led by a duke, who together comprise of the Imperium, essentially the overseeing power of the universe. For the saga of Dune, the most important is House Atreides of the planet Caladan. Atreides holds our protagonist Paul, heir to the rule of Atreides, currently overseen by his father, Duke Leto I, and his concubine Lady Jessica. Notably, we also have Duncan Idaho and Gurney Halleck. House Harkonnen are their longtime rivals, and are overseen by the callous floaty Baron Vladimir and his nephew Glossu Raban Harkonnen. Finally, we have House Carino, who get the least mention in Villeneuve's film. Led by the Emperor Shaddam IV of the Imperium, Carino have ruled over the galaxy for over 10,000 years. But jealous of his adoptive cousin, Duke Leto I, who is loved by all and seen as a charismatic and honourable man, the Emperor conspires with House Harkonnen to destroy the entire faction. Besides these key forces, the galaxy also relies on the Landsraad, a governing body that represents all the great houses on land, and the Spacing Guild, who are responsible for all trade and transportation, a monopoly which has lined their pockets and turned them into an economic powerhouse. Obscured in the shadows of these politics are the Bene Gesserit, a witch-like group who have been pulling the strings behind the scenes for hundreds of years, through selective breeding and a power known as the Voice, which can bend others to their will. Our final faction is the Fremen, a free people whose home is the desert planet of Arrakis. The Fremen importantly include the elusive Chani, planetologist Dr. Niyat Kynes, and tribe leader Stilgar, who are key to Paul's journey. Arrakis holds a special organic material known as the spice melange, which is used for interstellar travel and extending human life, making it the single most valuable resource in the galaxy, meaning Arrakis is being hotly contested by the houses. While most imagined futures rely on computers, Dune uniquely has none. There's an elaborate backstory where humans rose up against androids, banishing computers, instead keeping around highly trained people called mentats, essentially human computers used by the houses to make complex decisions within an instant.
How can the Emperor take everything we've built and give it to that Duke?
That is a gift, not a gift.
We join the story after House Harkonnen has given up their power on Arrakis, with House Atreides being assigned as temporary rulers of the spice-producing planet by the Emperor. But this isn't the whole story, as is the case when dealing with the Game of Thrones. With all the spice-producing machinery in disrepair, Atreides seems set up for failure. Despite this, Duke Leto takes on the task of trying to bring peace by befriending the Fremen instead of exterminating them as Harkonnen had done. Leto negotiates with the Fremen's chieftain Stilgar, while meeting with the somewhat shifty planetologist Niyat Kynes. At the same time, his son Paul is having intense visions of Zendaya in the dunes, to which we can all sympathize. While Atreides settle in, Lady Jessica, a Bene Gesserit herself, introduces Paul to the leader of the clan, who gives him a deadly trial of will, which he passes, an act which secures Lady Jessica's belief that her son may be the Kwisatz Haderach, a prophesied messiah and super being. To create this ultimate being, the Bene Gesserit had essentially conducted a secret breeding program over the centuries to preserve important bloodlines that would culminate in the Kwisatz Haderach. A product of the program herself, Lady Jessica had been instructed by them to bear the Duke a daughter, but no sons. This daughter was to be wed to Fade Rauther, nephew of Baron Vladimir Harkonnen and heir to House Harkonnen, healing the generations-old rift between the houses, and their son was to be the Bene Gesserit's long-awaited Kwisatz Haderach. However, Jessica fell in love with the Duke and produced for him the son he desired. The sisterhood was furious at her disobedience, but still somewhat intrigued by the potential in Paul, allowing him to live. While their plan was essentially to have a Bene Gesserit-controlled Kwisatz Haderach on the throne, they'd also foreseen the dangers ahead for humanity after witnessing the Golden Path, an expansive, prescient interpretation that revealed an optimum path through the countless threads of cause and effect to be encountered by the human race. As Paul is taught the value of leadership and nobility from his father, and the ways of the Bene Gesserit from his mother, the Emperor uses Harkonnen to stage the war against House Atreides, while also sending his terrifying Imperial specialist known as Sardaukar. After blackmailing the Atreides physician Yo to turn off the shields, Harkonnen wages a surprise attack on the settlement, killing the vast majority of them, while taking in Leto for humiliation. Fortunately, Yo implants a gas-filled tooth in Leto's mouth, allowing him to use his last moments to breathe death at the Baron. Despite killing everyone in the chamber and severely injuring him, the Baron ultimately survives this attack. Meanwhile, Paul and Jessica manage to free themselves using the voice and use an emergency kit to help them survive the desert. Luckily, Duncan manages to find his way out of the slaughter and finds them in the desert before taking them to an old research station housing Dr. Liet Kynes, who also reveals herself to be a Fremen. Confronted by troops, the planetologist smuggles Jessica and Paul to safety, while Duncan fights to the death before dying herself. After a brief chase through a sandstorm, Paul and his mother manage to find the Fremen deep in the desert, led by Stilgar and Chani, the girl from Paul's visions. Stilgar accepts them, but fellow Fremen Jamis protests against it, forcing a ritual duel with Paul, which he loses. And so, Paul joins the Fremen, beginning his journey to becoming the Kwisatz Haderach, which is where the film ends. But this is only one chapter in an expansive universe of prophecy, and if you'll indulge me, we're going to go over some of the major events to come in the next few thousands of years. After learning the ways of the Fremen, Paul spearheaded a highly effective campaign of guerrilla warfare against House Harkonnen and the Emperor's forces that had taken control of Arrakis, and would eventually conquer the two powers in Arrakeen. With his marriage to Urilan Corrino, daughter of Emperor Shaddam IV, he successfully negotiated the end of the long-standing Corrino Empire and his ascendancy into the position of Emperor. But this marriage was only in ceremony, for his love was Chani, the daughter of planetologist Liet Kynes. With Chani, Paul would have 3 children: Leto Atreides II the Elder, who was murdered by Glossu Rabban Harkonnen, Ganima, and Leto Atreides II, who would go on to become the God Emperor and rule for over 3,500 years. Upon being crowned as the new emperor in the year 10,193 AG, as revealed to him through his prescient abilities, Paul thrust the theology and many customs of the Fremen into the empire before waging an unrelenting crusade to implement his vision of mankind's future. After a bloody crusade that lasted more than 12 years, sterilized whole planets and claimed billions of lives, Paul Atreides eventually subdued all rebellion and was revered as a god. The Emperor's interpretation of his prescient visions necessitated that Arrakis be transformed from a barren desert planet into a lush and fertile world, with the exception of a small desert for the sandworm to keep producing spice melange. Despite his strong leadership and formidable abilities, Emperor Paul Atreides began to feel building pressure from discordant groups within the Empire. Among the schemes of his enemies were an attack that resulted in his blindness. While he could still see through prescience, doubts began to surface in Paul's mind regarding his interpretation of the future. Feeling increasingly frustrated and out of control, he began to seek a way out. After the birth of his children Ganima and Leto Atreides II, Paul became convinced he had lost his prescient abilities, for he did not foresee the birth of his son, only his daughter. Believing himself to now be no more than a blind Fremen, Paul disappeared into the desert, offering himself up to Shah Halud, as was the Fremen custom for the blind. This was a powerful statement of humility from Paul that signified the Emperor's interest was for the tribe, and that even he, the Emperor, the Kwisatz Haderach, Paul who was Muad'Dib, was not above Fremen law. Following this, his son Leto began to see the Golden Path. His ability to see into the threads of causality led to him adopting a sand trout's skin and crafting a future in which he became a human sandworm hybrid, the long-lived God Emperor. In this nigh indestructible physical form, he would have the necessary time and power to guide the whole of humanity as a species. While Paul chose to turn from the horror of the intrinsic suffering involved in this path, Leto II embraced this role, realizing that the path was ultimately required for humanity's long-term survival. For 3,500 years, he used totalitarian, ultimate theocratic tyranny, including breeding programs and other genetic manipulation, to enforce domestic tranquility. The intention of the path was always to enlighten and mature humanity beyond its worst tendencies, towards stagnation on one end and total chaos on the other. It had to be able to eventually govern itself and overcome its jingoistic propensities in order to gain from the chaos, avoid stagnation, learn, survive, as well as harness new awareness throughout the millennia of continued revelation that would follow his inevitable death. In the end, this saw humanity explode across the universe and learn knowledge and technology never before encountered in the old Imperium.
Denis Villeneuve has a grasp on character-driven narratives, small in scope or large in scope. Thanks to Frank Herbert, here's a story that's on that scale, but with characters and relationships and stories.
I found Denis to be one of the best collaborators I've ever worked with because we immediately started talking about the book. He was always incredibly open to exploring it further.
From being influenced by reality to influencing all corners of modern sci-fi, Dune is an amazing series, and Denis Villeneuve has done an incredible job to bring this rich text to life. As this exists as only part one in a proposed trilogy, and as we've discussed, there is so much more to come, this could be the beginning of an amazing cinematic universe. Well, that's all for today, folks. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to stay up to date on all my content. And yeah, if you have any other suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. As always, it's been a pleasure. Niyat here with Film and Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.
Every time I had a question or a doubt, I always went back to the book. Even as I was shooting, even when I was editing. As Hans Zimmer was doing the music, we were always going back to the book, reading the book. I mean, together. I mean, it was like the Bible. There's some moments in Dune that I knew I was not good enough. There's others that I feel that I was very close to the original dream. Frank Herbert is one of my favorite authors, and I wanted to make sure if he had seen this movie, he would have feel that love.